Okay, YouTube people. First, I want to thank everybody for their continued support. I'm up to 1,000 subscribers and I really appreciate it. What I'm going to be doing today is changing the ignition on my chopper. I'm going to the Dyna 2000i and I have quite a few videos on the channel about the Dyna 2000i. I had one in this bike, but it ended up having some kind of issue and Dynatek replaced it for free. So I'm going to reinstall it. Right now I have a dual fire ignition back in it. It's just the Dyna S. The first thing I'm going to do is lift the bike up off the ground. My battery, my rectifier regulator, and my coil are all underneath the transmission on a custom plate I made. So I can't get a jack under there and then drop the plate. It's very inconvenient, but I don't have to pull it down much, so this is what it is. And you'll get to see how it is I lift the bike to do that. I've always just taken a couple 2x4s, put them under each side of the bike, and then lift the bike up this way. Now this works on all the Harleys I have pretty much. Okay, once I have the boards stacked up under the frame like this, I put some boards underneath the rear wheel, and then I just take the boards out from underneath the frame so that I can get to that bottom plate. I also make sure the bike's in gear when I do this. The last thing I do is move the boards forward, and that way it supports it from tipping. And that's pretty much how I go for this. I'm sitting on the floor, and the first thing you have to do is get this plate where everything is off the bottom of the transmission, and the way I do that is there's 3 studs back here. After I get the plate out, I'll show you exactly what it looks like. And also these 3 studs are stainless and attached to a stainless plate, and they're welded to the plate, and then the heads were cut off because they were bolts. You'll get a better view of that once I get it all apart. You can see this wire right here is the ground wire for the battery. Anytime I'm connecting to any kind of ground wire, I try to make sure to have a very clean connection. So if it's on the frame, you want to make sure that's clean. And then I use these, they're a lock washer, and they kind of bite into everything. And when I use these, they've been very successful. And I put them on the top and on the bottom of this ground connector so that they bite into that real good. The other way this plate is held on is I have 2 bolts right here that go into this lower portion of the frame face forward. Now these are tricky to get out because it's right up against the rectifier regulator. So I loosen them up a bit, both of them on it, and then I drop the plate down. I'll take my plug wires off the old coil. You can see that bolt right here, and I just loosen it back. Now where those bolts go in, the plate's slotted so they don't have to come all the way out. And now I just give the plate a little pry from underneath, like so. And there is the plate. Now, it's still wired, as you can see. You have two wires. They come from the stator. This wire here goes back to the brake light switch and the tail light. This wire is power over to the coil. That's switched. This is just a jumper. These two wires come from the on-off switch. And the power that goes up there also goes to the headlight off that switch. You have the circuit breaker here, of course the battery, and the voltage rectifier regulator. You can see there's always plenty of road grime on the plate. Here's the notches in the plate I was talking about. So that the wires aren't getting all stressed out, I put it up on a couple 2x4s. Okay, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to unhook this coil and hook up the single fire coil. Again, these are two stainless bolts. I drilled a hole in the plate, pushed them in, welded them in, and then cut the head of the bolts. The same thing was done for the rectifier regulator, and they're all cut off so that it's flush across the bottom. Again, I use these star washers to bite into the wires, and I believe the coils come with these. This blue and white wire come from the ignition, and when we go to single fire there will be three wires. There'll be a blue, a white, and a pink. Now I just lift the coil off. You can see some of the other things I did down here is I put a washer on the bottom side. Also, there's this spacer here. They were just made out of some stainless tubing. I put a nice thick piece of rubber down beneath it also, just to take some of the vibration out of it and support it. Next, I'm going to go back on with the Dyna coil. They call it their Twin Fire 2 single fire high output, and it's the Dyna DC 6-5 coil. And you can always tell single fire is going to have 3 posts, dual fire is only going to have 2. One thing I forgot to mention when I was installing the other coil is it has 3 posts and the dual fire only has 2, and I said that it was important that you hook the rear one to this post, the center one to the battery, and then the other post to the front. It doesn't matter where you hook those 2 wires. Essentially this is one coil. They share the center post. So essentially when you have a 3-post coil, the center post and one of the terminals, outside terminals, is one coil, and the center of the post and the opposite terminal is another coil. So you can make either one the front or the back. I happen to make this one the rear because mine mounts this way, so it's easy to keep track that this plug wire is going to go to the rear cylinder and this plug wire is going to go to the front cylinder. So just wanted to point that out. Okay, the next thing I'm going to do is remove the pickup out of the nose cone. I was actually able to slip the wires out of that connector without having to remove the master cylinder. So now I just took the cover off and I take the gasket off. And the next thing I do is loosen these standoffs. And this is how you set your timing. You could stick a screwdriver in here, a smaller one than this, and then you rock the plate back and forth to set the timing. Now I just take the plate out and then slip the wire through the lower hole. Before you can slip it through the lower hole, you have to cut the eyelets off. I always leave the wires a little bit long so that if I have to do this job a couple times, you have enough wire to keep making it up. What you have left is the mechanical advance unit, and you can see that the weights and everything is nice and free. All you have to do is take this center bolt out. All this comes out, and I'll show you what that looks like. That's the mechanical weights, and they go in and out real nice and easy. And I always put a little grease on where they run across the stud here. And then this is the pickup, and you can see there's one magnet there and one magnet there. And when those magnets pass here, that's how it initiates your spark. When you're installing either one of these, there's a certain way that they go. And when you're installing the cup for the electronic 2000i, the cup part number is 32402-83. That's a Harley part number. It's important to get this tang right here into the tang of the camshaft there. And it just locks right in there real simple. Like that. And then this takes a shorter bolt to hold it in, and I always put a little blue Loctite on that. I wanted to point out, I called out the part number of the rotor cup that you have to use, and it's 32402-83, and that's for 83 and later Evo motors. It's important to note that that cup is gold in color. This one also worked on my 84 shovel. It's important to make sure you get the right cup if you're using this. When you're installing the mechanical weights, it's the same kind of thing where there's a little pin that sticks out here. So when you're installing the mechanical advance, it's the same type of thing. There's that pin right there that goes in that same notch in the end of the camshaft. When you put the pickup on, it has a flat on just one side. If you look down in here, there's a pin right there, and that flat goes up against that pin, because it'll go over these advance weights either way, but you have to make sure that it goes over that pin, and then when you twist it, you can see the weights come in and out, and centrifugal force brings those out and advances your timing. The mechanical advance on the timing is the exact way they do it with the points. So now that's all installed. Next thing I'm going to do is put the electronic ignition wires in. Now just fish the wires through, and then fish the outside protective cover through. Okay, once you have it in there, you just put the studs back on. And I put them on very light because I'm still going to have to time this. The other thing I'm going to do is put a little heat shrink over the end of these wires so I don't have to worry about them shorting out on anything. Now that'll keep those from shorting on anything. And then when I'm all done, I'll just curl them up in here like this. The other thing I like to do is I take a small wire tie and I get it around this wire here, so if anything pulls on it or anything like that, it doesn't come out, especially the jacket. Okay, now I have that wire tie under there, and I just kind of push it under a little bit. The next thing I'll do is fish the wires the rest of the way over to the coil. Alright, the next thing I'm going to do is strip the wires. You don't have to take much off these. And then I'm going to put crimp connectors on them. When you're putting these up, you just want to put the insulation right to where the crimp connector is, and then give them a crimp. Always give them a tug. Now the other thing I like to do is give them a little solder. It's important when you're soldering to keep the iron up towards the front, because the solder wants to travel towards the heat. So I just want to solder the wire to the connector right here, and that's it. I don't want the solder to run up the wire because it'll make it hard and it won't flex. It'll want to break from the vibration. It's important, if you're going to do this, to make sure you do this part right. You put a little solder on the soldering iron to conduct heat. You put it up to the part, and then right there, and it's done. And you never touch a solder joint until it's completely cooled, or you'll get a cold solder joint. Again, put a little solder on the soldering iron, put it up to the part, let the heat conduct through the solder, stick the solder right here, and then you'll see the solder will melt. The other thing to check is when I do it, you can see back here that there's no solder up in the copper there. So it's loose and you don't have to worry about them breaking off. Next, we'll connect these to the coil. So the way this is connected is the pink goes to the rear cylinder, the white goes to the center, which is the positive of the battery, through a switched battery, and then the blue wire goes to the front cylinder. If you notice on this Dyna ignition, I only have the number 1 turned to the off position. This is because this motorcycle's kick only. I have the software and programmed it for 0 revolutions before the electronic ignition lights off. They come from the factory where they're set 3 revolutions before it lights up the ignition. And you have to program it with their software and their connector to get it back to 0 for a kick only bike. If you're having this issue, contact me. I can help you out. That's why none of the rest of the switches are moved to where you would think they should be in the instructions, because you take care of all that in the software. Once you do it in the software, it makes the rest of these switches inoperable. Okay, so like I said, it's pink for the rear, white for the battery, and blue for the front. Okay, everything's good and tight there. First I give all my wires a check, then I'll put the plate back underneath of it. If you notice, the battery's not bolted down, but when it's up in here, it's tight enough that it doesn't move. Now we're at the point that we need to time the motor. So I'm going to use Dynatek's instructions on how to static time the motor. You have to remove both spark plugs from the motor. It makes turning the motor over much simpler. You have to remove the timing plug on the opposite side of the motorcycle, like so. You can see it's removed. Now on this motorcycle, it's real easy for me to rotate the motor. I just go on the nut, which is exposed. But normally what you want to do is have the rear wheel off the ground, put the transmission into the highest gear, would be 5th gear on this, and then use the rear wheel to spin the motor. The rear wheel and the motor spin the same direction. So if you want to spin the motor forward, which is how you want to do this, you just spin the rear wheel forward until you get to the timing marks. So you can see in the timing mark hole, and now I'm just going to spin it until I bring the mark up. And the first mark is there. That's probably the rear cylinder, top dead center. Now, you always want to time it off the front cylinder. And in the instructions, it tells you to put it at top dead center on the front cylinder on the compression stroke. The camshaft turns at half the speed of the crankshaft, because just because you have the timing marks right does not mean that you're at top dead center on the compression stroke. You could be top dead center on the stroke that's in between the exhaust and intake stroke. So it's top dead center of the compression stroke. There's the advance mark, is the line on this engine. You have to know what yours are. It's not that hard to figure out. Go to top dead center on the front cylinder and then you back it up, and the first mark you come to going backwards would be the advance mark. Now right there is top dead center on the compression stroke, and I'm going to show you the other way to tell this. The way to know you're on the compression stroke is, before you come up to that, I'm going to back the motor up some. You put your thumb or finger over top of the spark plug hole, and if you're on the compression stroke, it'll build pressure. Hear that? That's pressure. I'll do it again because this lets you know that you're at top dead center on the compression stroke. Again, my finger's over the hole. Hear it? And there. That's compression. If you were 180 out from here, and I'll take it that 180 out and show you that it's not correct. Okay, now I'm 180 degrees out, and if I put my finger over this hole, I can go right past the timing marks, and at no time does it build compression where it's blowing my finger off of there. And you don't even have to be able to see the timing marks to do this. You just keep turning it until all of a sudden it builds pressure, and that's how you know. Right there, you heard pressure. Now what you do at this point is you take something. I use a screwdriver. My recommendation is, I see a lot of people use a straw. It's probably a better idea to use something soft, but you put your screwdriver or whatever down in the hole of the spark plug. I'm very careful because I'm using something metal, and then you bring it up until it completely tops out. And then after it completely tops out, it's going to start to go back down. Right there, starting to go back down. I find that that feels about the very top. The screwdriver's not moving up and down. And now we'll look in the timing hole. You can see in the hole where it's just about at top dead center. The mark is just to the front of the hole. I'm looking a little bit diagonal and I can see it. Now, I'm just going to back it up ever so slightly to get it at true top dead center right there. And that is right where you have to be in order to time the ignition. That's where they want you, at top dead center on the compression stroke. Okay, that's perfect now. Now we'll come back around to the ignition. Again, the instructions say get the front cylinder at top dead center on the compression stroke. Now we rotate the 2000i to cause the LED to turn on and off. The ignition has to be on in order to do this. And of course that means the battery hooked up. And then you just rotate the electronics to get it to blink on and off. Okay, so like I said, the instructions say to rotate it to where the light comes on. Okay, right there, the light's coming on and off. Now I'm just going to snug it up a little bit. Okay, the instructions say to rotate it until the light comes on counterclockwise, and there it is. Now you rotate it clockwise until the light just shuts off, and it's a very, very small amount at this point. Right there. And then you lock the ignition down. That puts it at about as close as you can do it, static timing it. At this point, I put the cover back on it, and I'm going to start it up. Okay, so I want to thank everybody for watching and say I'm really thankful that I have 1,000 subscribers now, and I really appreciate those of you who have subscribed, and appreciate you following along as I go. Just really started the channel to kind of help people out and help hopefully my kids in the future work on my bikes when I'm not around. So again, hit the like button if you haven't subscribed. I'd appreciate it if you do. and I'm going to give it a start. I hope it starts in like 3 or 4 kicks.